Welcome to Democracy Does, the Civic Power Playbook, a podcast that cuts through the noise to explain what's really happening in our democracy. Each episode breaks down key issues with insight from policy experts and change makers, giving you clear tips to take action. Whether you're fired up or feeling stuck, you're in the right place to get informed and get inspired, because democracy works best when we all... Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Democracy Does. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Andrew Flachs. He is an associate professor at Purdue University with a focus on agriculture, including environmental anthropology and political ecology. He has traveled the world focusing on the importance of agriculture, farming, and community. He's the author of several books, including his most recent, Feeding the World as If People Mattered: How Small Farms Produce Value Beyond Yields. Thank you so much, Dr. Flachs, for being here. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
There has been so much going on with so many things, including what's happening to farmers. And I was excited to have you on because I want to know how someone with your expertise can explain it to us city folk. So we've been hearing about how farmers have been hurt by trade wars that's been going on with China, and the issues about soy and grain, how tariffs put on items like steel and fertilizer have affected farmers, making it more expensive for them to do business, labor shortages due to immigration. All of that is talked in the general and about large farmers. And for a lot of us, again, city folk, it feels so far away. But can you translate that into how it impacts smaller farmers and really how that impacts all of us?
Yeah, thanks. It's great to think about it in that sense because tariffs are such a wide-ranging kind of tool, and they can affect us in lots of different ways. So even if you're not a farmer, if there are tariffs put on some of these key goods within the larger economy, we're going to feel those rippling effects in some of the inflationary pressures that we might see at a grocery store, or you mentioned steel, some of the inflationary pressures we might see, say, at the hardware store. And because so many of these key commodities are built into things that we use in our everyday life, we have this very interconnected economy. And when the cost of some of these key inputs become higher, whether that is animal feed or steel or lumber, these things ripple out across all other kinds of sectors where we might not ordinarily expect them to. The issue of agricultural tariffs in particular affects different kinds of farmers in different ways. And here's where it gets a little more complicated and interesting in some ways.
Mhm.
Tariffs on some of these larger farmers are placing a lot of pressure in food that I might ordinarily be rather critical of, and food systems that I might be critical of in a different setting, because these are pressures that are being felt by very large uh, holdings of single crops,
Mhm.
monocultures, where we're growing key commodities that are not really for human consumption. These are things that are shipped off to become elements of highly processed foods or biofuels or animal feed, most likely. And a lot of my work looks at how we actually really need to spend a lot of time transforming those systems. So there's an element of this that some parts of it could be good for some small farmers who are growing more diversified crops. But the sticking point there is that we can't suddenly flip a switch or snap our
Mhm.
fingers and transform all the other aspects of the supply chain where we might see it as consumers in a grocery store, or suddenly grow out a bunch of farmers market infrastructure that didn't exist previously. So even as we might, in some unexpected ways, have a slightly more agriculturally level playing field with competition between very large monoculture and somewhat smaller diversified farmers, the rest of the supply chain hasn't caught up to that. And there again, that's where the other effects of tariffs, where costs of transportation, of
Mhm.
travel, of infrastructure, of everyday goods comes to affect us. Because, of course, we can't forget that on a small diversified farm, a producer is also a consumer, is also a
Yes.
member of a family, is also part of a rural community. And so they're going to feel the same inflationary pressures that we city folk might feel as well.
Okay. So we're all connected. Well, I want to talk about a very thoughtful essay that you wrote about how free school meals could save taxpayers in the long run. And this piqued my interest because one of your key points was that when you support local farmers, you are actually having them supply meals to schools, which again is a direct pipeline to helping the economy in your community. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, thanks. I want to start off with the best case scenario of that. The best case scenario are some of the programs that we have seen in the past in this country, but also in countries around the world, where the full buying power of the government is mobilized to help out small farmers who live within a region, who produce diversified crops, which allow them to sell in lots of different kinds of markets. So, diversity in the ecology helps diversity in the economy, which supports other sorts of jobs. And that sends a bunch of food into local distributors. So, white collar work and the business side of food
Hmm.
distribution, getting it to where it needs to go. So, you've got a lot of people employed, you're funding a lot of different kinds of economies within a
Hmm.
region. And if we're spending those food dollars on things like school lunches or hospital lunches or other sorts of public programs and public spaces, that's also returning money to working families who don't have to spend that money buying some food for their kid at a school
Hmm.
lunch. And I say that as a parent of two young children in my public
Hmm.
schools. We're saving some money for a larger for someone who's got a patient in a hospital or a family member in a hospital, and they're getting locally sourced nutritious food as part of their hospital stay. And if we look at who's doing a lot of that work and provisioning, we can also see how that affects uniquely and particularly working women and
Hmm.
mothers. Because who packs the lunch, who's making
Right.
sure everybody's well fed, that is often mom's job. And if
Hmm.
mom can take any part of that burden away, burden, joy, it's all time.
Yes.
Any part of that work that can be taken away with a program that's funding local farmers, that's funding biodiversity, that's something that's really positive in all kinds of ways and generates all kinds of value. The Rockefeller Foundation and the Center for Good Food Purchasing did a study just a couple of years ago, looking especially at New York and Vermont, finding that school meal programs cost something like $18 billion to run, which sounds like a lot of money, and it
Yes.
is. We make all kinds of choices in our government. But with that $18 billion investment, they're providing nearly $40 billion, so a 2-to-1 return in human health and economic benefits if we understand all of this stuff, like mom making a lunch as work, as something that has an economic impact. And so to zero in even on the school example, to show just how far a school lunch can go, we've got a working mother who can save a little bit of money and save a little bit of time and redirect that time towards anything else, whether
Hmm.
that's productive work, spending different kinds of time with their family, going on a nice walk
Hmm.
after dinner is done. Then in the classroom, there's a lot of work by education scholars that's shown quite convincingly that when kids are better fed, they perform better in the classroom. And that doesn't just affect our poor kids and our kids who were performing poorly in class because they were hungry. As anyone who's been in the classroom knows, if there's one disruptive event, that can set off all kinds of reactions within the
Yes.
classroom. So when kids are better fed, it makes it better for everyone, even our high performing, even our wealthy kids. And so universal school lunches can have lots of great, super positive impacts within the systems that I've described. So that's the positive version. Something we might want to be a little bit critical of are some of the less positive ways in which school lunches can be run. And that's where we don't refocus that time and energy on our local food producers. We're not investing in our local economy. And one of the less positive iterations of that is that really our school lunch subsidies or school lunch public tax contributions are things that subsidize food that we have known for decades is not healthy.
Hmm.
We subsidize multinational corporations who are not investing in local communities where families are feeding their own kids or their own region. We're subsidizing kinds of agriculture and distribution programs that are not climate smart, so they take a lot of carbon to run.
Yeah.
They don't return those same sorts of benefits into the local economy. Study after study has shown that when we spend more within our region, those dollars stay in our region and they
Hmm.
don't um, fly out and aggregate somewhere else, creating a greater amount of income inequality. So there's some really great positive versions of this that we might see. The United States could look very productively to places like India, which has a constitutionally mandated midday meal program. It is the greatest anti-poverty program on earth to give anyone who goes to school a hot meal, a nutritious meal. Almost all of that is sourced locally. It's a terrific model. It's one that the US did something very similarly to up until last spring when around $1 billion of local food purchasing was canceled. But there are
Wow.
plenty of other sorts of programs that exist that we can try, that we have done, and that, from my perspective, we really ought to consider again in the future.
I want to ask you about that in just a minute, but before I get to that, when we're talking about providing school lunches, a hot meal for kids, and just the benefits for the community, you know that there was the removal or the cutting back significantly of SNAP benefits over the past couple of months. And I think that fully came into effect at the beginning of this year. What are your thoughts about that, just broadly speaking?
I think that connects to what I was just saying about the most positive and the somewhat less positive versions of these big levers that we can pull as a society. In one of the less positive versions of SNAP, SNAP is a subsidy to these highly concentrated food corporations, some of which are providing food, and that's wonderful. Uh, Others of which don't seem to be doing too much on the inflationary pressures that we see. And part of
Hmm.
that is because of this intense consolidation. We know that as markets get more concentrated, prices rise, and the
Yes,
supermarket sector is one of the most concentrated that we have. And agriculture and agribusiness would be one of the other most consolidated, concentrated sectors that we have in the economy. When those public monies like SNAP are effectively used as a subsidy to this already highly concentrated sector, I see less of those rippling benefits. On the other hand, that is not the only way in which these dollars can and have been used. There are lots and lots of programs, especially over the last 20 years, that have risen to make benefits like SNAP and WIC and other food assistance programs go further in the local economy. So, partnerships with farmers markets, partnerships with small independent owned grocery stores, partnerships with large grocery stores that just commit to
that's
doing more
right.
local sourcing. So it's not like there's a big is bad element to this necessarily. I might say that consolidation without return to the local economy is one of the more negative aspects of
Hmm.
this. But that doesn't mean that big is bad. So we can pull these levers in lots of different ways. Another aspect about SNAP that's really important to remember is that small diversified farmers around the United States are not just producers in an economy, they're also consumers. And so for a lot of people who are themselves primarily farmers and are making their living that way, a lot of them are on SNAP and a lot of people in these rural communities are on SNAP as well. And so when we see these programs being cut, they have to think about how they're spending their dollars differently. That can hurt the local food economy. That can prevent those local dollars from circulating. And let's extend it beyond farmers within our rural community. A lot of farm workers receive lots of different kinds of
Hmm.
food assistance programs. And that's really essential to getting this food work done so that we can have this local economy in the first place. By cutting these different safety nets, we're making it harder and harder for a lot of rural communities to do the kinds of diversification that would make them vibrant, thriving communities.
That's interesting. So I do want to get a clarifying point. I want to have a point clarified actually in terms of smaller farmers then, were they not really beneficiaries of government programs like SNAP? So for example, huge farmers seem to be getting great subsidies to participate in USAID, for example. Would small farmers be able to compete in something like that, or is that not accurate?
is difficult to say one way or another because there's so many diverse programs that farmers could be part of. So if we look to something like USAID, food aid for other countries, or a program that used to exist during the Cold War, PL4A, the Food for Peace program, a lot of that food aid, international food assistance programs, were really built on conditions of overproduction here
Yes.
in the United States, where we were producing a lot of certain of these grains and crops, and there essentially wasn't a market. If we look at supply and demand kinds of
Hmm.
curves, we were saturated, and so this was another place for that croppage to go. And it was also part of a helpful geopolitical strategy for the United States. And through those kinds of channels, as they evolved through things like the former USAID program, mostly it was those larger commodity farmers who had existing supply chain connections.
Yes.
Other sorts of government aid are absolutely have been targeted at small farmers and have been really, really foundational and transformative. For many years in the Farm Bill, there have been provisions that help to support new and beginning farmers, which is incredibly important.
Yeah.
As we look to some of the recent farm census information, the average age of the farmer now, of a farmer in the United States, is creeping up. I think it's around in the last census, or it's over 55, and we're
Interesting.
getting older and older. And so new and
Why?
beginning farmers are incredibly important to this. The why is a
Yes.
great question. It has a lot to do with that process of consolidation. It is hard and expensive to buy land if you don't
Hmm.
already come from a landowning family. It is lucrative to rent that out, and it's hard to get into this game. So there have been government programs that have been incentivizing new and
Hmm.
different kinds of people. They have been classed under diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. That combination of letters and combination of programs has recently come under a lot of fire by the current administration. A lot of those programs have been cut. And as one of the consequences of that, intended or not, it is more difficult for young, diversified economic farmers, let alone demographically diversified farmers, to get into this scene and feed the communities where they live. I think that's a really helpful example of understanding how access for historically marginalized groups can improve outcomes for everybody. If we look to these kinds of pipeline programs and support programs toward new faces in agriculture, one way or another, this problem will have to be solved as we move towards this demographic disaster.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I want to know what is the harm? What are the consequences of eliminating those programs? Because you mentioned disaster. What are you talking about?
I am simply looking at a trend where in the last agricultural census in 2022, 95% of farm producers, 95 to 97, depending on the class of the size class of the farm, uh, were white farmers. The average age of small family farm producers was in the mid 50s, and that is true as well for our larger farmers. Farmers are increasingly likely to be older as we go through all these different classes of farm. We need new people to take on this kind of living. And this is really important, especially as we look to the integrated questions that we've been talking about: climate change. We look to a thriving rural economy. We look to feeding people where they live. Uh, all of these can be and should be interrelated. These are the solution to that is all based in making it attractive and possible to make a living as a farmer. For a long time, the answer has been grow larger, grow bigger, um, leverage these investments. And that has been to the benefit of a very small number of people and producers. For the vast majority of folks, this has involved major crises like we saw in the Dust Bowl in the 30s and in the farm crisis in the 1980s, where crises of debt and overproduction lead to crashes in farm prices. And the thing about being a farmer is that when you lose your farm, you're often also losing your home and your
Mhm.
identity,
You lose
something very
everything.
difficult for anyone to deal with. We need more farmers, not less. The 20th century has seen a mass exodus from farming. And I say this as someone who grew up in a rural area, a town of around 1,000. Um, for a long time, for about a century, the messaging has been smart kids get off the farm. And we need to change that
Mhm.
because we want to, it's going to be important as we look to all of these interconnected problems that we want to solve in the 21st century to get more people to want to stay in rural areas, to apply their talents towards making these vibrant, thriving communities. And so to do that, we have to make it possible for people to have lots of different kinds of work in a rural economy. We have to make it possible for people to grow lots of different kinds of things. All of these are interrelated.
When you talked about feeding the world as if people mattered in your book, you traveled the world and saw how other cultures were approaching agriculture in the way in which you were just referencing, looking at it as a calling to take care of your community. Uh, what surprised you most in your travels?
I think the thing that really stuck with me after around 15 years of working in this case, Eastern Europe, South India, and here in the Midwest where I'm based, is learning to pay a lot more attention to the things that farmers do when they're not farming.
Right.
My job as an anthropologist was to go around with clipboards and surveys and talk to people and ask them about their yields and what seeds you're
Mhm.
planting this year and how did it go. And I would have little check boxes in all of that form, and then the back of the form would be covered in little notes to myself. Things like had to interrupt the interview because the baby was crying,
Mhm.
had to stop work because something was broken, had to sell off a parcel of land because I had a medical event, and medical debt was really the thing that
Mhm.
was driving some of this. And as these things pile up and I smartened up a bit and learned to pay attention to what people were properly telling me as a social scientist is
Mhm.
supposed to, it became really clear that this separation is very artificial. And so if I'm thinking about how to get somewhere like sustainable agriculture, we need to make sure that people want to stay in these villages, in
Mhm.
these rural communities. We need to make that a life that is attractive and worth living. We need to understand that agricultural decision making is driven by healthcare costs, is driven by childcare costs. This is something that came up as well in the pandemic for a lot of family farms or small farm operations. When childcare closed, suddenly, once again, mom who was doing a lot of work, which was not recognized, which was not legible on their taxes necessarily, but certainly was a lot of work. Suddenly, that caretaker role took up all the time with
Mhm.
caregiving for kids, and a huge amount of the farming productivity fell down. That's only surprising if we don't understand all of this as part of what it takes to be sustainable. So as I look to some of the lessons that I had learned there, if we want to have sustainable farming, we need access to healthcare. We need access to good education. We need a diversified economy that can support a diversified ecology. One of the biggest problems as we look to a place like the rural Midwest where I live is not just that we have monocultures of single row crops like commodity corn and soybeans, but also that there's only one buyer in the county, and that buyer is only buying one thing. That's not just a monoculture or a monopoly. That's also a monopsony, which is a word I had to look up. It
Yeah.
means that it is
What
it's a
is that?
situation where we've only got one buyer.
Wow.
So there's only one possible thing you can sell. And
Mhm.
this is as much a problem as anything else. So we don't have a diversified market that can receive something that is like looks like a diversified agricultural situation. So there's lots of different levers that we can pull to support this. School lunches are one that we were talking about. SNAP is one that we were talking about. And there's plenty that could come from the private
Mhm.
sector too. These don't need to be all public programs. Again, there's
Mhm.
plenty of examples from around the world that we can look to show how agricultural development fundamentally rests on these other aspects of social development. The two are very much interrelated.
Who do you think is doing it right? You mentioned India in terms of providing hot lunches and meals, but in your 15 years of travel, who do you think was doing it right, doing it best, someone to be a good example? Who is a good example?
I think that it wouldn't be right to say that any particular country is
Okay.
is doing is doing this correctly because countries are full of lots of different regions, and they got lots of different sorts
That's
of pressures.
true. Okay, that's
Um,
fair.
so I would say that India has a wonderful model
Hmm.
for school lunches in ways that support them. In some parts of the country, that model is working really well, and it's integrated with other workfare kinds of programs, where the government has programs to pay people for work that really needs to be done.
Yes.
And that work is often done during a lag in the agricultural
Hmm.
season. So seasonal farm workers during this 100-day period when there wouldn't be so much work to get done, they can then do infrastructure projects that they have recognized are helpful. And that can be really, really effective. So integrated programs there. Other parts of the country, it is less effective,
Hmm.
and there are lots of reasons for that, including misappropriation of funds,
Yeah.
including all the same things that we would have in any context where you have a sudden opportunity,
Uh,
individual opportunists, what have you.
Understood.
Another example that I might bring up comes from the the school lunch solution out of Brazil, and especially the city of Belo Horizonte, where uh, the municipality of this larger city decided that to meet school needs, what they really needed was not a centralized service, but they needed to effectively subsidize a lot of entrepreneurs. So they needed to empower the food sellers who were providing a lot of the snack foods and the lunch foods and the hot foods and the street foods already. They needed them to be better connected to local farming producers. They wanted to empower their
Interesting.
own um, competition, if you will. It was almost like funding a new private market. They wanted to give these folks a new chance, but they also set a series of rules. So that you have to feed the kids.
Hmm.
You can't um, price these above what the kids and the working families can afford, and it's got to be nutritious foods. And everybody worked this out democratically over a series of years, and this now is a city uh, that has gone a long way towards eradicating child hunger,
Hmm.
uh, which is a wonderful success story.
Yeah.
And everywhere around the world, there are pockets of people who are
Yes.
doing this kind of work. In Eastern Europe, in Bosnia, where I was doing some of this research for the book you're talking about, uh, there are not great state levers to pull. This is
Hmm.
a state that has suffered tremendously from the breakup of Yugoslavia
Sure.
through the 1990s war and genocide, and now there's quite a bit of tension that results from that political instability um, in this region where I was working. So the government is not always the most helpful source of resources or the most effective lever that can be pulled. And so instead, what we see a lot of are families growing effectively mutual aid gardens.
Hmm.
There's a great primacy that's put on being able to give gifts and to be seen socially in this space where you can contribute to hosting somebody and having that nature, that level of hospitality. And it's part of to have a home is to have a garden really in this space.
Interesting. It's a
And so
community garden.
it's a community garden, it's a mutual aid garden, it's a garden that you have where if somebody else's foods are destroyed, you can go and help them out and they can
Hmm.
help you in the future. And
Wow.
this is we say a lot. Nobody necessarily wants to be resilient. Resilient is something that emerges out of a traumatic
Yeah.
experience of
Out of
some kind
adversity. Yeah.
and adversity, exactly. But this is one of the things that can emerge from that is a
Hmm.
lot of communal strength.
Hmm.
And if we tack back and forth and pick and choose some of the best practices from these models, we can see a lot of great benefits. Community gardens are wonderful. Urban gardens are wonderful. They are not going to provide the same kinds of things that we want to get at the grocery store,
Yeah.
but they can provide new friends, new social relationships. They can ease some of your pocketbook pressure, some of that inflationary pressure. The United States has pulled that lever several times in just the 20th century. If we look back to relief gardens in the Great Depression, victory gardens in World War I and World War II, the rise of community gardens in 2008 during the financial crisis
Hmm.
and during the COVID crisis, we see a lot of practice there
Yes.
for growing food and foraging food, and then ultimately, most importantly, sharing that in community.
Yes. Yes.
This idea of complete self-reliance is not something that applies well here. I think that's another key lesson, that all of these solutions work in community.
Yes.
Self-reliance, uh, when we think about, um, I'm trying to think of a key word in incarceration, where you are solitary confinement.
So, yeah, isolation. Yeah.
Solitary confinement is one of the worst punishments that exists in the United States prison system. Uh, Self-reliance, the absence of community, is not something um, that we really want to aspire to,
Mm-hmm.
this horrific punishment. A garden is a way to grow that community. And so I think that's a much more positive framing. That really ties together many of these lessons that
I'm
we've seen.
I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the things I want to ask, I always ask my guest experts before we end our conversation. I ask, what are your top 3 tips or power plays, I like to say, that will make people feel empowered to contribute to the type of change that you are talking about, whether you understand farming, whether you're part of a farming community or you're not. And you've touched on it very nicely here, but if you could, just 3 simple tips that just the average person could walk away with what they can do.
I love that question. This comes up so much in the
Mhm,
classes that I teach here at a
mhm,
place like Purdue University, where people come in and they learn about the histories of these really big problems that really an individual is not going to be solving, and an individual's
right.
choices are not the ways out of this. And so I try to scale it up in this way. There are some individual things that you can do that might be really helpful. We can plant seeds in gardens. We can help people out. We can do the work of creating these relationships
Mhm.
with whoever your community is.
Yeah.
Community can mean lots of things. You might not have the best relationships with your neighbors and your families, but there are other ways that you
Mhm,
can create social networks that are key to this aspect of resilience. And food is a great big part of that. Uh, our food system is designed to be alienating and for us to not think about that stuff so much. So as we're learning, one of the kind of empowering things we might do, if you're into gardening, you might grow something, even if it's just in a potted plant by the window,
mhm,
and to
mhm,
be part of that experience, relate to food in a different way. You might get more into cooking if you have the time and resources
mhm.
for that, depending on where you're at with that. One thing I encourage my students to do when they come through classes is to ferment something,
Oh,
because
interesting.
in our world of super hygienic grocery stores and all that, we can tap into how most of humanity has preserved foods for hundreds of thousands of years with salt, thyme, and water.
Mhm.
That's an empowering experience because it requires you to trust your senses, to
Mhm.
recognize that you're a full person who's got good judgment. You know, if it smells bad, don't eat it. Uh,
Right.
Use your senses. Taste something weird and different that you made that's your own. That can be really, it's fun. That can be exciting. It's not a difficult
Yes.
technology to do. The last thing that I would encourage people to do is to recognize where those circles are that they can get involved with, because we all need each other to be
Mhm.
stronger together.
Yeah.
I don't know what everyone's different organizational structure is going to look like. You might find yourself really at a time unable to be with some other people. But if we can't make this change alone, then we need to make it in community.
Mhm.
And that's a really important part of, I say this as an anthropologist, that's a really important part of being alive and being a human. So to find some organization, something bigger than yourself that you can be helpfully contributing to. It doesn't take much. It's an essential part of what it means to be human. And these are the levers that we need to really pull to make the changes that we need to see in the world.
Mm. Thank you so much, Dr. Flax. This was very, very powerful. And I love that you gave people something tangible and fun to do. And I've never fermented anything, so I may be tempted to try it. I'll have to let you know how that
Please,
turns out.
yeah, make some pickles and get back to me. Yes.
I will. I will. So before we go, feeding the world as if people mattered, how small farms produce value beyond yields. Dr. Flax's book, where can people find that?
That book will be on store shelves in, I believe, May.
Mhm.
You can buy it from your favorite local bookstore or online retailer. You can also find it at the press website there, the University of Arizona Press.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's really been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much.
And now it's time to recap Dr. Flack's top tips. First, he says plant seeds and gardens, literally and figuratively. Find out the community connectors in your neighborhood or become one. Number two, grow a garden. Learn about a community garden or simply try a potted plant. Anything that could change your perspective on how nature and food work. And finally, test the magic of nature. Ferment something. He says veggies, a little salt and water, and a couple of days could do magic. And if you want to learn more about Dr. Andrew Flack's book, Feeding the World as If People Mattered, How Small Farms Produce Value Beyond Yields, you can go to University of Arizona Press. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you're feeling a little more hopeful, a little less stuck, and maybe even inspired to take action, because democracy does work when we all participate. And don't forget, sign up for our newsletter to get updates on when our next episode drops. You can go to my website, democracydoes.com. And as a bonus, if you haven't gotten one, a free and easy tip sheet on how to get involved.